So welcome back to today's webinar on how to avoid project failure. And again, we are delighted that so many of you have been able to join. In case you didn't hear before, we do encourage you to be interactive. So do please feel free to ask questions using the Q&A function within Zoom. I'm delighted today to be joined by our panellists. Welcome again to Dave Roberts, who is a Transformation and Finance Director, who's worked with organisations seeking organisational change or growth across a wide range of sectors. So we'll be looking forward to your insights today. And also Marie Roberts, for the record, no relation, who joins us from Satellite Applications Catapult, where you're a project manager, who has worked across a range of projects, including IT, infrastructure, software, manufacturing, to name but a few. So thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
I think it's well known that there are many reasons for project failure. According to a recent Gartner report, 80% of IT projects fail. And when we extrapolate more generally, apparently 70% of projects fail, which is a huge number. Now, we couldn't possibly in 1 hour today talk about all the reasons for project failure, but rather we're going to focus on 3 really critical areas that can set projects up for success. And the first of those I wanted to talk about today was developing the right capability and making sure there's a good understanding of that within organisations so that they can make a realistic assessment of shortfalls and plan for that so they don't commit to costly endeavours before they've understood it. So starting with you, Dave, I'd love to get your insight of why do you think it's valuable to be able to stand back as an organisation and assess your project capability?
Sure, thanks, and thank you for inviting me. I mean, going back to what you were saying right at the start, there's a whole host of reasons as to why projects can fail. Unclear outcomes to start with, the change wasn't landed well, the project plan actually wasn't believable, we really didn't have the resources, it was treated as a hobby project rather than something, much more sort of focused. And the project manager and then the other facets of project management, but particularly the project manager, are central to really that whole sort of cradle to grave journey. So actually having people there who understand what's going on, what's needed, can be that sort of conscience to the business, and actually sort of raise the flag early, be that early warning sort of signal, both in terms of hard issues and soft, more sort of people type issues, I think is key. So any business really sort of who's serious about starting to get into change needs to realise that it's a profession in itself, project management, and needs to be sort of invested in as such.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know from your experience that it can take time, effort and considerable budget potentially to step back and assess a whole project organisation. But what is the value in doing that from an insights point of view? What can you learn by taking that time?
The first thing I'd say is I think to your comment around the cost and the investment, it's all proportionate. Clearly if an organisation is just planning to do a simple sort of change, then...
Can I just stop for 1 second?
Sure.
I'm so sorry. Yeah. I'm getting a lot of live questions in at the moment suggesting they can't hear at the moment. Just come through. Is it all okay? Hopefully it's all been corrected now. Thank you.
Fine, okay.
So sorry to interrupt.
No, not at all.
So
not at all.
Talking about the insights that you can get from the capability assessment.
Yeah, I think, I've seen it done and been involved in very simple assessments where really it's about a handful of just, people or sort of resources we need to make sure have got the right sort of mixture of skills between them to run a project successfully, to actually sort of a much bigger sort of a situation where you're bringing different teams together from different businesses and you're trying to work out, right, what's the new practice or project management practice going to need. Now, so it's not a one size fits all, but very much you focus on the practical experience people have got, the business experience, which is key, the techniques and methodologies they use, and starting to think about where you want to standardise those or what's the right thing to follow, and then also sort of the softer skills, which is key in terms of how the project managers interact with the business and frankly get stuff done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, Marie, that's something that you're passionate about in terms of how we train and what we train to project managers and indeed the teams. Dave started to mention there's some of those things. It could be knowledge based. It might be about the softer skills. What's your experience of what's important to understand and train to help project managers succeed?
Yeah, I think all aspects of project management are important. I think having project managers that understand, have a good grounding in the end-to-end process of a project, how to set the project up, how to lay the solid foundations, the processes that you need to run a project effectively throughout. So risk management, stakeholder management, budgeting and cost control, all of those processes. And I think having that training can just bring confidence and consistency to an organization as well. You're all kind of doing the same things and doing it in the same way, and not having those gaps that can appear where you've potentially not consistently doing risk management, for example, in an effective way.
So it's quite a holistic approach, and there's such a range of skills that our project managers and teams need. You mentioned there a number of times confidence, Marie, and not only just knowing process and getting knowledge based, but the softer skills. I think you both mentioned that. From your experience, what kind of soft skills do project managers and even potentially some of the teams need to be effective?
Yeah, there is a saying, I think, around projects are people, and it is all about people management at the end of the day. The project manager needs to engage with a lot of stakeholders, so not least their project team, but also senior management within the organization, often customers as well. Project managers are quite often the face of the organization. So I think having that grounding in soft skills, those kind of how to deal with people, how to deal with conflict if it arises, how to sort of develop your team, motivate your team, are all really key skills that project managers have to take on board, really. I think as well, although often project managers are not necessarily line managers themselves, you take on a little bit of that when you're managing a team. You can have a team working for you. You need to be sort of cognizant of burnout, or how happy your team are, how motivated they are. So these are all sort of core soft skills, I think, that are important for a project manager.
Yeah, and really critical for success. I think you raised some really interesting points there around, not just on project success in terms of being focused on the outcome, but actually by keeping our project capability current, it also leads to motivation and important skills within the team. Dave, from your experience, has that also been the case? Is that something that you've tried to explore or develop for project success in terms of the interpersonal capability of the team?
Yeah, I think with project management is a career in itself. Yeah, and as going back to when we were talking about why invest in sort of understanding sort of what the raw material is you've got there, and actually the relevant experiences, you can map those to a more sort of structured sort of career pathway for the project management community to actually sort of follow. And I think that's motivating in itself. People can understand, right, I'm doing this, I'll do that project, it will help me progress in my career, to more complicated projects, things that are more fulfilling. And as we were just touching on, the softer skills come with that as well. So really important. I think we'll come on and talk about it later, but the relationship between a project manager and their sponsor is critical, because the sponsor is the person who should be giving them the air cover, and the project manager needs to be able to feel that they can be totally transparent about the issues they're seeing and ask help when they want to, rather than actually sort of feeling a bit too shy that they don't want to, or actually there's other reasons why they just can't sort of get things out in the open. I always think that the PM, project manager, is the conductor of the orchestra, be that people from the business who have come in as subject matter experts, be that other project management people, or people from HR or IT or other key functional specialists you're going to need at a certain stage in the project to get to the outcome.
And all really valid, as you say. We expect so much of our project manager very often, and it's really important that we do take time to equip them. Otherwise, inevitable will happen when they perhaps don't fulfil the brief.
And it's funny. I found, and I'm sure you've seen the same, Marie. You know, when I've sort of started working with a new team, you've got a mixture of people there. Some who have been career PMs all the way through, others who have sort of fallen into it along the way. You know, once they were a finance person or did a marketing, and suddenly they did a project, and often their experience is invaluable because they know the business inside out. And actually where you can help them is actually giving them that formal structure and training, whereas for the career PMs it's often the other way. They need to know more about the business. So understanding what you've got there and how you can really sort of develop the team, I think, so really rewarding for them as well as adding value to the business.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is no one size fits all. And we've actually had a great question in actually when talking about the skills that people need. And we've been asked by, thank you, Anna, we've got resilience is a big thing for project managers. What advice do you have for any PMs on this call on how to cope with challenge from business owners or customers? Can I go to you first, Marie?
Funnily enough, I was just actually going to say something about resilience because when we're talking about soft skills for project managers, often, and I think this can be particularly a problem for new project managers who maybe don't have that experience behind them, that when something goes wrong and you're dealing with an issue, it's really easy to take that personally and to sort of feel like I've failed, I've done something wrong. And that's not necessarily the case. Things do go wrong on projects from time to time. Obviously, we want to try our best to stop that. But you really sort of need that, I think, that experience, that confidence behind you that can come with having training to sort of know, oh, I did everything right, but this happened. It's not my fault. It's not something I should beat myself up about. I need to just find a way forward, and sort of try to resolve the problem. And I think something that can really help with that as well is mentorship within project teams as well. So if you have more experienced project managers who've got a kind of track record behind them, if they kind of are supporting and mentoring more junior project managers, they can sort of bring that perspective. Really, is fine. Things go wrong from time to time. Let's try and sort this out resolve the problem.
A great practical approach there. And Dave, what's your perspective?
I was going to say, I think it can often be a lonely place being a project manager or a program manager, or because you are the one, as you say, who can think, golly, this isn't looking good, or I need to raise a flag on something, or I'm getting a particularly difficult stakeholder I'm dealing with. And as you develop sort of the broader community and sort of the PM practice, I think having that sort of peer group or sort of support is essential, and that comes down to setting the right culture in that function, so people can be really open and transparent. Because the worst thing is having a situation where a PM feels they can't say anything, and the sort of the good news culture starts developing. So the only stuff that gets reported up to the PMO or the sponsor, from the team delivering the project, is the good stuff, and they're sort of not being as transparent as they really need to be about the bad stuff, and then it starts to get wrong. It starts to go wrong.
Yeah, and that culture is so important. I mean, assessing capability can really help us to develop the right culture. And we talked about practically mentoring people. And something I know you've talked about before, Marie, is the idea of having building a culture of reflection almost through process. Have you done that before to kind of help, again, develop capability within a project?
Yeah. So, I mean, traditionally, we often talk about the close down review at the end of the project and, looking back over the project, what went well, what didn't go so well. What I found works really well is periodic step backs, we often call them. So looking back over the previous period at, what went well, what didn't go so well, what can we learn and take forward into the next period, so that building that reflection into the project plan itself, rather than waiting until the end when you can't really change anything. It's already happened. Then it might benefit another project coming forward. But I think if you have those points of reflection, could even include them in your regular team meetings, or have a specific step back. That's what we call it. So.
No, I think it's a great idea. It's almost building on the agile philosophy there, isn't it? And taking it to any project. So you build a culture of openness and that feeling I can go up and tell people if there's something going wrong and learn as we're going along, which is motivating. Yeah. Dave, I know you mentioned a moment ago another reason for doing this is not just to secure the success of the project, but also to secure the careers, and I mean build the careers is a better word, of the people on the team. Do you think it can help as well, doing assessments to determine whether or not you align with a particular certification program for something? Does that have value potentially?
Well, when you're actually looking at sort of the portfolio of people you've got there.
Exactly right. Project management capability in general rather than a project manager specifically.
I mean, certainly sort of, recently in one of the assignments I've been working on for a sort of property services company, we had one company had acquired their main competitor. So the change community that came together were all sorts of different, flavours in terms of qualifications and experience. So we did the big assessment, and it was well received because people could see actually they were going to start to get a personal development plan from it. But then that sort of facilitated the discussion amongst the group as to if we were going to harmonise around a particular sort of certification or sort of training sort of methodology, etc., what would we do? And actually, I think it's far better to actually sort of help that evolve from the group themselves rather than saying, right, we're going this way. Mm-hmm. And half the people who haven't gone that way in the past think, actually, why is that? So, but yeah, I think, there's a number of different, methodologies out there, and, help getting the group to actually sort of, feed into that and influence that, I think is really important.
Yeah, and it can support kind of succession planning as well. Yeah. If you've done an assessment, you can see who maybe your rising stars are, or whether or not you've got a knowledge deficit, or maybe that you've got lots of experience but no formal training, or minimal, and that can really help as well with developing the team. Are there any kind of practical, I mean, I know we're coming, because we want to move on to the next area, but are there any practical solutions that you can think of there, Marie, that would help people if they're thinking about, how do I go about assessing my capability? Why is it worth the investment? What would your words of wisdom be there?
Yeah, so in terms of practical steps, I think the APM is such a great place to start. They have their the PM competencies all laid out, and I think it's a really good way of self-assessing. Where are my weaker areas? What do I not know so much about? And then targeting that area for development. And I think you could apply the same for for Prince 2 as well, or any of the project methodologies that are out there, or any of the certification programs. I think choosing one that fits best with your organisation is a good way to go, and that really helps. I think everybody to be talking the same language. You're all talking about the same parts of the project, the same life cycle stages. So yeah, I think that's probably a good way to go.
Point. Yeah, and absolutely it helps drive that consistency, that familiarity that in itself then leads to results as well.
Yeah, and I think from the business's point of view, I mean, businesses are investing a lot of money now in change projects. So if you put yourself if you're in a finance function, you'd make sure you have the right capabilities there. So it's exactly the same for the project management community. Yeah, it's a professionalisation and an investment area, and you reap what you sow.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you say there, we wouldn't start a project without understanding what it was we were trying to do. So it makes kind of sense that you shouldn't really think you can deliver projects successfully if you haven't thought about the capability and how you're developing that, whether through the project or with more formal bespoke training programs or whatever. And the motivational aspect. Interestingly, there was a report done by Warwick University in sort of 2022 where they got some economists to review various people to determine the effect of happiness on productivity. And in fact, happiness, they determined at the end of their research, led to a 12% increase in productivity. So we're not just, training shouldn't be thought of as just a cost, I think, but actually it can add value and literally support the delivery of the project.
Drives motivation, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk. I mean, it's very clear some of the practical things on why developing and assessing capability is important. One of the other areas we wanted to look at today was why it's so important at the beginning of a project to have a clear framework for project delivery. And this means really from thinking about the framework we need from start-up and approval through delivery and then progressive evaluation. So why is it so important? We'll start with Marie first.
Yeah, sure.
Here. Why is it so important to make sure we've got a framework for project delivery that people can follow?
I think a number of reasons. I think laying the foundations for a project, so that starting point and making sure that time is made available within the project, built into the project schedule for that initiation period, for that laying the foundations, setting the project up, and then I think also. We often have project team members that work across multiple projects as well, so they're not just on one project, they're maybe working on 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 projects at one go. So I think having that framework that all projects move through can be very beneficial as well. You sort of haven't got project team members having to work with one project manager in this way and then another project manager in this way, so having that kind of clear process through. Also, projects don't happen in isolation. The project managers, we've talked a lot about project managers and the capability of project managers, but project managers need to be supported by senior leadership, senior managers, the sponsor. I know we were going to talk about that. So, having that governance framework as well at the beginning and setting that up and sort of everybody understanding what's their role and responsibility on this project. In particular, I think the sponsor and other people who are involved in the project from outside, all of that really sets the project up for success, really.
And it sounds often like a given, doesn't it, that we'd have a clear framework, but I think we probably all experience sometimes chaotic projects that don't have that clarity of governance. Obviously, one vehicle we can use is a PMO, so program, project, portfolio, office, call it what you will. But that helps to define that. In your opinion, Dave, is there value in having something like a PMO and how can it help?
Certainly, yes. I mean, if I sort of take a step back, I think, totally agree with what Marie was saying around sort of the 4 stages. And when in a number of places I've gone to sort of work on assignments, and you think, the common denominator as to why these projects are going wrong is often people are skipping through the first couple of stages, be it scope and then actually plan, and they're straight into delivering. And actually having that structure, I think, is important regardless of, whether you've got lots of projects going on or just a handful of them, really. Because it really sort of helps make sure we're ready to go and we can do it well. And the business, a lot of the business people want to get on with it. So hence the role of the project manager, but then also supported by a PMO who can bring the structure and the framework and actually sort of ensure we've got proportionate reporting. Be it a small project, it might just be a sort of a half a side, whereas a big project, it might be a sort of a pack. Actually sort of bringing that all together and being able to, with the support of the project managers, being able to sort of play that back to the business and the sponsors, I think is key.
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, one could arguably say, because I absolutely agree with you, and often pressure and organisational pressures force us to get to delivery as quickly as we can, and that comes sometimes at a price. But also there's even almost the front end before that. I know, Dave, you and I have talked before about the value a PMO can have in actually almost before the business case and saying, what are the things that are most important that align with strategy before you even jump into potentially just looking at a project individually and saying, that has a purpose and some value. But what would you have to say around that, Dave?
I think, this is when we were talking about sort of portfolio. And again, I'm so mindful that, some organisations will literally have just a tiny handful of projects, so it's quite clear what they're there. But many organisations have a lot of different projects they want to do, ranging from the must do, maintain, comply, remain legal, to actually, the key ones which is totally centered around strategy, to then ones that might be more speculative or actually a little bit of sort of like hobby projects, people, key people actually want to sort of do because they think it's the right thing for the business. So the role of the portfolio is really to sort of pull that together and provide that single funnel of here's the projects into the project management community to start to deliver, supported by the PMO. And ideally, sort of that funnel will have, you'll have gone through a process where there's been the right sort of prioritization. So the project management community then know where they need to be sort of focusing their efforts. Because there's nothing worse than, different project managers, as Maria was saying, being pulled in different directions. And actually, if you've got that, agreed change plan, then actually sort of you've got a good chance of delivering it.
Yeah, and I guess having that focus within the PMO ensures we are focused on value, that we're doing the things that are most important. We likely will always be asked to do too much, but instead of stretching the team too thin, it brings focus to what is done at the time.
And I think, with the PMO, I mean, there's a number of roles they play. Another one would be, making sure that we're focused, someone somewhere is focusing on the resource planning. So actually, have we got enough PMs to do all these projects? Have we got, where are the pinch points where, the project's going to be pulling on IT or on HR? So, and actually predicting those. So you can either sort of do the trade-offs and the dependencies and resequence the delivery of the projects, or you can bring in new resources. You say it's that forward view, isn't it? Making sure that's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So key. Yeah, please.
I was just going to add to that as well. We were talking just previously about reflection and lessons learned, and I think the PMO can be sort of part of that continuous improvement on projects. So often, project finishes and the project manager's off onto the next project or onto, a completely different project. And there's always a risk that those lessons that were learned on the previous project are just lost. And I think that's a really important function of the PMO, is kind of, holding those lessons learned and making sure that they are applied to future projects and that there's that sense of improvement.
I think you've raised so many good already. We've talked about creating the right reporting structures, enabling that sort of culture of improvement to develop, and thinking about the pipeline and how we focus on value. So many things are positive in that framework that we might set up using a PMO. Why do you think then, Dave, sometimes PMOs just don't get the support and there isn't the investment for them, or people don't see the value?
So this is the but moment. I think, the culture, I think, is the key thing. So I'd describe this in two directions. One, where I've seen it work badly is when the project management community see the PMO as a nuisance, that it's bureaucracy, it's form filling and so on. And that's often a point of view I've found that the business can start with. So you have to sort of demonstrate to them actually the sorts of things we just talked about is really delivering value. We're planning better. We're going to deliver with more confidence. We've got a good view on the risks. We're not going to, be too risky and so on. So there's a real selling job often to do into the business to want to support the PMO and actually invest in it, particularly when stakeholders are just interested in their project, not the wider portfolio, whereas actually leaders should be should be looking across the whole piece. But often it comes back to the starting point to achieve all that is the project managers and the PMO have got to understand each other, work closely together, and there's got to be trust, I would say. Yeah.
And so, how do we go about building some of that? Because I think one of the things I know you've quite passionate about, Marie, and talked about is having clear terms of reference. Because I guess one of the issues could be, as you mentioned there, Dave, project managers feeling the PMO may be a nuisance or only seeing it being there to police them. From your experience, how can having clear terms of reference or things like that for the framework, how do you set it up, be important?
Yeah, I think the terms of reference, sets out at the beginning of the project the expectations of everybody on the project. So, what do we expect from the PMO? What do we expect from the PM? What do we expect from the sponsor? So, I think having those terms of reference is really important, and understanding those boundaries as well. I think I have worked in organisations where the PMO can become a hindrance and can overstep the mark, and creating processes for processes' sake, it can become a bit like feed the beast, really, in terms of reporting. But so I think having those boundaries and working in lockstep together on what's appropriate, and and where the support can start and end is really key. And I think terms of reference can really help with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know, Dave, you've used the word before, which I think sums up beautifully, is there needs to be a framework for any project, big or small, PMO or not, but it needs to be proportionate. And, what are your thoughts around that, about making sure that you don't kill an organisation with bureaucracy, but you have the right minimum processes in place? How do you go about ensuring that?
I mean, I think it's through teamwork and building the change practice or the project management practice, which is PMs and PMO together. And I think thinking about, right, what are the key things? Have we got credible plans? Do we understand the risks? Which are themes that everyone in that practice should be sort of worried about. Is our RAG reporting sort of reasonable? And for instance, being comfortable to report a red, but equally sort of then the project managers and the PMO working together to work out the path back to green. And doing those sorts of things together. I don't think it's rocket science. It's just about setting the tone correctly, having the right people. And we were talking a bit earlier about sort of the softer skills of the PMs. I mean, it's as important for PMO folk as well, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess the sweet spot with a PMO is that the framework still empowers people, but it's there to ensure that the right checks and balances are in place, so we don't get overloaded with bureaucracy. And then we don't run into those problems of it just being seen as an overhead, which potentially then impacts the ability to get the funding for a PMO, because there are many value-add functions. You mentioned several. In your experience, I mean, does the PMO have a role in assurance as well? Is that something that they can help with on a project and support the sponsor with? Is that something you've experienced?
I'm trying to think. What do you mean by assurance, I guess?
So really making someone that can be seen as a collaborator to help you find issues before you go external. So insurance obviously is trying to provide that confidence with the project that it's going in the right direction, and for the stakeholders. And in my experience, that's a role that the PMO can fulfill, actually supporting internally.
Although I would say I think the accountability should sit with the project manager, for that, because it's their project, and the risk registers and so on. The PMO's role is really the critical friend, to sort of give them that support, sort of make sure that the PMO's providing the guardrails the PMO's providing the guardrails that the PM and the project is working within. So it's a mutual thing. But ultimately, yes, the PMO is then going to be looking across the portfolio and looking at what's the combined operational risk that might be building here, and highlighting.
Yeah, the PMO can also be important in holding project managers to account as well. So I think, absolutely project managers accountable, but I think the PMO can have a role in holding project managers to account as well, making sure that they're following the correct processes and, pulling them up if they're not. So.
Yeah, and I guess that's why that healthy is kind of important between the two, so that the terms of reference that you mentioned, quite key, because I think often where there is conflict or people feeling a role overstepped, I think the words you use, comes from that lack of clarity of not demarcating. So I guess one key tip there for anyone listening is, have they got those terms of reference for the PM, for the PMO, so that the value does come and the conflict is kept in abeyance, I guess.
Yeah.
So let's just move on, because we've touched onto the PMO role, and thinking about if we have the right framework, and we've talked about the importance for any project, big or small, having that. But no matter what the processes are we have in place, ultimately, I think leadership of a project is key. And interestingly, there was a sponsoring change guide, a piece of research done by the APM, and they sought to explore the role of the sponsor, and whether the sponsor, which is the third area we're looking at today, is a hindrance or a hinge in developing projects. And the conclusion they came to was it was the single most important indicator of project success or failure, the sponsor. So Dave, going to you first there, how important is the role of the sponsor on a project?
Pretty critical. Again, there'll be flavours and levels of, given the sort of the type of change that's going on, but if I think to, some of the more, sort of fundamental change programs I've been involved with, I mean, the sponsor has to be the champion of the project. There's got to be providing that sort of outside-in perspective to the project team to sort of help them understand sort of how the business is sort of viewing sort of what's going on. But the sort of question, I mean, it's sort of often when I've sort of come across sponsorship issues, and often a half-day training course or something, or just to really explain to them what should you be thinking about, can work wonders. The sort of questions they should be sort of asking themselves are, what's the risk in delivering the business case? Another one would be, and I think I've touched on this earlier, is the program developing too much operational risk as it goes about its delivery? Or am I okay with that? And importantly, are my stakeholders or my sort of colleagues, do they understand what we're trying to achieve here, and are they supportive? So it's that sort of big picture stuff, but you've got to sort of be able to say, I'm fine with all of them actually, otherwise the program is going to run into problems at some point.
So I think a key thing here that's really important is, from what I'm picking up, and I'm interested in your thoughts as well, Marie, is that the sponsor must feel accountable for the project. In your experience, what are those key characteristics that a sponsor should have if they're going to be effective in the workplace?
I think they need to be present is probably the key characteristic. Often sponsors will bring a project into being and then hand over to the project manager, and they're busy people, often very busy, and they've moved on to the next thing. So I think being present, being available to the project manager on whatever timescale and frequency is agreed between the project manager and the sponsor is probably the most important thing. Being a champion, you mentioned that word, champion, and I think sponsors should be champions of the project. And I think that by championing the project to to senior management, I think that's a great motivator for the team as well, to feel that I'm working on an important project. It's got visibility. People are interested. It's in the outcomes. So I think that champion role is really important for a sponsor. I think they obviously need to have some level of seniority in the organisation in order to be able to make those decisions that are outside of the authority of the project manager, and to be able to provide that direction. And I think they need to have a good relationship as well with the stakeholders as well. So the project manager tends to have the day-to-day relationship, but often the sponsor is liaising with stakeholders, senior stakeholders potentially in the client organisation. So,
and all of these things are really key roles that we're talking about, which we don't always see in the sponsors that we get. And I guess one of the key things in tying it to success of a project is that, at the end of the day, the success of a project is not just the accountability of a project manager. In fact, it's not only with the sponsor, even though they need to be in the driving seat, but it actually rests with multiple levels of management within the organisation. So in your experience, Dave, how pivotal is that role of being a really effective communicator and kind of that word we said, championing that project? What does that mean in practical terms? What should they be doing within the organisation?
I think leadership is the word that comes to mind. I mean, it doesn't have to be, I think it's interesting what Marie was saying about they've got to be present, but they're busy people. So you've got to be realistic about how much time you expect from them. But it is about just, having that sort of constant support. I mean, the ideal in terms of being present would be, from a project manager's perspective, would be a sort of a regular health check on the project with the PMO and the project manager. So they are properly involved. Now, that's not, you don't see that all the time, but that's good. But equally, sort of other places where I've worked, the key role they've had is just around the board table, explaining why this is important. We're going to have some hiccups, or highlighting to their board colleagues, right, we're about to outsource, get to the key moment of outsourcing some infrastructure and application technology to a third party, and there will be bumps in the road, and we're as ready as we can be, but there will be bumps in the road. So it's that sort of leadership is what you often need from the sponsor, because in complex change, stuff will go wrong. You've just got to be ready to deal with it quickly.
So certainly we're hearing themes of, that importance of communicating at the right level, of being accessible, because I think that's absolutely true, that very often the danger is sponsors are appointed but then just not accessible because of their level of other work to do, which can lead to failure.
And they've got to know that they're not just going to hear the good news. They've got to be in with the bad news and to help us and the team sort it out.
Yeah, and that's key, isn't it? That they're available to support the project. So in your experience, one of the things that one could do is have a sponsor workshop.
Yeah.
Do you think that sponsors do know their role very often when they're a project, or is it worth investing in like a workshop to help sponsors understand?
Yeah, I mean, I've done that a few times. Often it's best, I think, business led, ideally from the sort of the change or the project management community. And whilst at the outset people might think, I don't need that, I know what's going on. Actually, sort of when you've got a few of these leaders together and they've all got a slightly different view of what sponsorship means or how they need to get involved. And as we just touched on, we're not asking them, we need X hours from you, we'll need some time, but it's actually more around you being present and leading and being those eyes and ears for us, as well as helping us through the tough times as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we've got sponsors fulfilling this really important leadership role, does the project manager need to be a leader? Marie, from your perspective?
Yes, they do, I think. I was just actually going to say about sponsors, and a practical point for project managers is, again, going back to terms of reference. I've done that with sponsors before. This is what I expect from you on the project. Are you happy with that? How often are we going to meet? So that's a very sort of practical thing you can do with at the start of your project with your sponsor, is just set those expectations around what you expect from them. But going back to your question, yes, I think project managers do need to be leaders. I think we have to lead our project team. And I've got quite a nice story around that, around leadership, because we often confuse or conflate project management, seniority, is what I'm trying to say, seniority with leadership. And we tend to think that leadership comes with seniority. But on the project manager needs to be the leader, and they need to have those leadership skills as well. They're leading the team. And the story I was going to recount was a colleague of mine from way back when. She had her first project actually that she ever managed was a business transformation project. Everybody on that project was more senior than her. It was all of the heads of departments. And she had quite a nice moment during the kick-off meeting where she was waiting for somebody more senior than her to start the meeting and, get things underway. And she just suddenly realised, oh, actually, on this project, I'm the leader. I need to step up and take, they're all looking to me to take the lead here. So, yeah, on a project, you're the leader. You need to lead your team and sort of, take on that role, even if you're working with people who are more senior to you in the organisation.
And I had two things. I mean, first, that's a great story. And, I think, the project programme manager is central. And I bet once she first did that, then suddenly it all became a lot easier for everyone, because everyone could actually see, right, I understand how it works now.
Exactly.
This is our person who's driving it, and we're just there to help. But going back to the other thing about the sponsor that we should touch on is they must still feel the accountability for delivering, which we said at the start. So going back to that IT applications and infrastructure outsourcing, I was the transformation director driving sort of the program, it was a big program, first generation outsourcing, working very closely with the IT leadership team. But we made sure that, the head of infrastructure, for instance, when we got to the moment of, right, this is the plan for how we're going to outsource, this is the business case, he was actually presenting it to the rest of the IT leadership team and seeking their approval. We'd done all the work in the background, but he had the accountability and felt he was comfortable enough to present it. And I think that's critical, that people feel they've got the ownership of it. Even though we've done the heavy lifting in the background, that's part of our job.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that ties back nicely to a comment you made earlier when you were saying, sharing some of the practical questions that a sponsor should ask as they go through. And it's kind of one of the things you said at the time was, am I ready to approve this to
Yeah.
the next stage?
Can I
And
support a
that's
go?
kind of-
Yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
absolutely important. That they've got to feel it rests with the eye.
Yeah.
And it's not a case of has the project, I'm just putting pressure. It's not a hierarchical relationship with the project manager in that sense.
Yeah.
It must be highly collaborative as it goes through. And I think that's what you're both saying. Do you think there would be value at the start of projects as a practical thing to actually get a PM and a sponsor to share their terms of reference so that they have understanding between each other?
Yeah, no, totally. And I think also I'd probably put the PMO in there as well, actually, because I think there's a sort of a three-legged stool really, where each leg relies on the others, and actually sort of doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we probably all experience if you don't have an effective sponsor, it can have a massive impact on the project management team in terms of, from your experience, Marie, what's the implication on the project team if a sponsor isn't seen to be engaged with the project in terms of the morale of that team again?
Yeah, I think it does demotivate the team, just because you sort of can feel like the project is not really that important. It's it's not sort of got the visibility within the organisation. It's not getting the attention. I think that can kind of rub off a little bit. You think, why are we doing this? Why, what are we working towards? So I definitely think there's a morale question. I think as well, when you don't have an engaged sponsor, there are things that take a lot longer. So those decisions, key decisions, if something happens, something goes wrong, you need a decision made, you can find yourself wheel spinning, and that's again can affect team morale. If you're just waiting for a decision to be made, you're not really sure whether you're doing the right thing. You can feel a bit sort of rudderless, really. Yeah, and obviously the project manager has to work a lot harder in those situations to provide that direction themselves. They're not getting that support from a sponsor that you would otherwise expect, and you're sort of operating in a bit of a vacuum. I think so. Yeah, it can affect team morale and the project manager's morale as well.
And it's interesting actually because all of the topics we've talked today, starting with assessment capability and going through the framework and then into the role of the sponsor, and it almost brings us back full circle to almost ask the question as well that the assessment should almost start at the top as well, that we need to select the right sponsors with the right skills and capability and arm them, equip them with an understanding of that role that, as the APM research found, it really is the single most important indicator of success or failure. Well, I can't believe how quickly the time has gone, notwithstanding a couple of technical problems at the beginning. So in terms of sort of rounding out the discussion today, and we've talked about three really important areas that people can look at to make sure they're set up for success. Dave, from your perspective, if there was one area that you would encourage from all the things we've talked about today that you'd say focus on for people seeking to have a successful start to their projects, what would it be out of everything?
Well, I think I'll go back to the project delivery framework. Really, I think it's in that planning phase. It's very easy for people to want to skip through understanding the as is and getting into this is what we're now going to change. And there's many examples of where people have done that and then suddenly they've changed something, they didn't realise the implications, and all things are going wrong and it's interrupting the business. So don't skip through the as is. I mean, as a project manager or as a sponsor, but really the project manager, you have to be really robust, often be really robust with people, that we need to spend the right time on this, get the right people involved and invest the effort to understand it. Then we've got a solid platform going forward. Because if you don't do that, it's at your peril.
Absolutely, and that really informs that framework, like we're saying, whether it's using a PMO or whether it's just understanding what the minimal amount is to empower people sufficiently, but make sure they understand the task in hand and at our peril, as you say, to go forward without that. Marie, from your perspective, if for our listeners, in terms of what you think is one of the key things that you would leave them with or suggest that they do, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that in terms of setting the project foundations and the importance of a really good kick-off meeting, which is your opportunity to get everybody on the same page around not just what we're going to deliver, but how are we going to deliver it. Something that I've used in kick-off meetings before, which can be a really powerful tool, is a pre-mortem, a risk pre-mortem. And you sort of can get your team to time hop a little bit to the end of the project and to think, okay, we're at the end of the project, it's all been a disaster, it's been a big failure, what went wrong? And it's a really nice way of getting people to think about risk and to think about those problems that could happen during the project and how are we going to deal with them in advance, having a plan in advance. Because I always find when you talk about risk, people tend to sort of shut down and find it a bit difficult. So I quite like the time hop and thinking about it's all gone horribly wrong, what happened, and it's quite a nice tool.
And that's so multifunctional, isn't it, using not only the term pre-mortem but the idea of getting everyone engaged at the outset, thinking what the worst could be that could happen, and getting everyone engaged in the solutions to ensure that it doesn't. So you can not only will that help with the capability building and thinking where there might be gaps, it will help with the minimum framework we need. And obviously, if the sponsor's an issue, then it flags that to us. I think it's a wonderful idea to bring in there, and certainly something I hope our listeners can take away as well today. So amazingly, we've gone through that last hour very, very quickly. So thank you both for all your contributions. Thank you as well to all of our listeners today and all the questions coming in. That's really appreciated. We love you being interactive. And obviously we will look forward to seeing you hopefully at our next webinar, which will be in the autumn, where we're hoping to have Adam Bodderson with us, who's committed talking about the future of project management. So we hope you'll get engaged again later. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.